Welcome to the podcast, The Storyteller, in which we talk to South Africans who have a special story to tell. Jean Tresfon is an award-winning marine conservation photographer. His passion for the ocean began as a schoolboy when he spent most of his time diving in the sea rather than on schoolwork. His speciality is underwater and aerial photography, and his journey to get there is rather interesting.
I wanted to be a marine biologist, and my father vetoed the idea. He said the world is full of starving scientists, and you are to go and get yourself a degree in commerce, and once you can afford to pay your own bills, you can do what you like.
Right.
So I started studying a BCom, and then my father passed away when I was in matric, and the BCom didn't really. Well, I lost my motivation, and I was a bit of a mess. So I ended up dropping out of university and becoming a diving instructor and running a charter boat. So I taught diving and took people diving, and then, as with all these good things, I fell in love with a very nice lady who's now my wife, and she told me that I couldn't be a beach bum my whole life, and I should study. So I ended up completing my degree through Cape Tech at night school, and ended up doing a degree in business management. And then, for my sins, bought in together with my two brothers to a brick factory. And for 10 years, I owned and ran Cape Brick, which was great experience in business, and but not exactly food for the soul.
How did you manage the transition from the need for money to a career in photography? Because I'm sure your business was extremely successful, but a career in photography is exactly what your father probably was afraid of, and wouldn't put bread and butter on the table.
Quite right. And in fact, the sad reality is that in South Africa, I think certainly in terms of wildlife photography and conservation photography, it's not really possible to make a decent living. I think if you do commercial photography or weddings or product photography, perhaps, but you cannot survive on stills photography at any rate. Shooting footage for documentaries can be lucrative, but there are only a few guys that do it. So I still have several business interests, but certainly my passion lies with on the photographic side.
That's interesting because I read your Facebook page from beginning to end, and by the end of it, I was exhausted. I just, I thought, I just don't know how this man fits so much into his life, and that's just reading about your interest in marine conservation, and I didn't even know that you have on this other businesses on the sideline.
And that doesn't include, obviously, 3 kids and a wife.
Yes, yes.
It's a constant juggle to fit everything in, and sometimes you have to lose several opportunities either on the business side or on the family side or on the photographic side. But life's too short, and you don't get another shot, so you've got to fit in as much as possible. If I'm guilty of anything, I try to do too much and drop the ball here and there.
And who gives you grief about dropping balls? Just you? Are you very hard on yourself?
To a degree, but obviously my wife is an amazing person and lets me know in no uncertain terms when not so much on her side, but for the kids when I'm not when I take my eye off the ball there. The kids have a way of telling you when you're not putting in the right amount of attention. But having grown up in boarding school my entire life, my wife calls me emotionally stunted, and I sometimes miss the cues that other people might get. and need a reminder from time to time that I'm spending too much time away or too much time in the field, and I've got to come back to earth every now and again.
Mm.
When you come home from a trip and you ring the doorbell and the kids say, "Mom, who's the strange man at the gate?" You've been away a bit long.
Oh dear. So I was wondering actually, as a marine conservation photographer, which environment do you prefer? Do you prefer being in the air or the water?
It's not so much a preference. It's like saying to someone, "Do you prefer beer or wine?" Or it's they're both amazing. So I started as a diver. I actually qualified 30 years ago this year, um, and that's where the photography side came in that I was privy to seeing things that not many other people got to see. And so many people said to me, "What do you see when you're down there?" And I had to find some way of explaining to them, and the best way was to show them. So back in around 1998, I started taking a camera with me, and in the pre-digital days, the learning curve was quite steep, and that's how I got into photography. I never was interested in taking terrestrial photos or photos on land, and became an underwater photographer. And then about 10 years ago, I learned to fly, and that was again quite a by chance occurrence. So the diving I've always been passionate about, and I've wanted to dive since as long as I could remember, but I never really wanted to fly. And then a friend of mine took me in his gyrocopter for a flight along the De Hoop coast, and I was kind of blown away by the different perspective. Both diving and flying offer you an unusual perspective on a place you already know. So the ones being down looking up, and the others being up looking down.
Mm.
And they have a lot more in common than you would think. And so I took this flight with a friend of mine, and he was quite keen for me to start flying. So he gifted me a what's called an introductory flight with the flight instructor, and I did this flight, and then signed up to do my pilot's license more as a sort of personal challenge. I think I was looking for another challenge, and halfway through the course, I was absolutely hooked. And I've been flying for the last 10 years, and I've learned probably more about the ocean in the last 10 years of flying than I have in 30 years of diving, because I've been able to cover a lot more ground and see a lot more things. And at the same time, it took me a little while to get comfortable flying a plane, but once I was comfortable with the piloting side, it wasn't long before I took my camera along and then tried my hand at the aerial photography side of things.
I know you do a lot of whale surveys.
Well, if I may speak to that
Yeah.
for a second. So, a lot of my time these days I donate to conservation causes. So, I've flown quite a few southern right whale surveys for the whale unit of South
Mm.
Africa, and I've flown shark surveys for the shark spotters. Um, and I do weekly marine wildlife surveys for myself, and then share my findings with the fish scientists, dolphin scientists, whale scientists, shark scientists, and so on. I also do surveys to check for illegal fishing and poaching and all sorts of other bits and pieces. And yeah, so I spend the bulk of my time doing those sort of surveys, and it's not something I really get paid for on the most part. Yeah.
Okay, so most of this is actually volunteer work.
Quite a lot of it is volunteer work.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's not that I don't get anything from it. So over the years, I'm not a marine scientist. And spending lots of time in the field with marine scientists, I've learned an incredible amount about the subject about which I'm most passionate. They get obviously an aerial platform, and they get to do their surveys, and they get to save money because scientists are always on a very tight budget. But at the same time, I learn an incredible amount, and get opportunities to photograph and see things that I wouldn't otherwise get. So there's definitely a two-way street.
You are not afraid of confrontation in the conservation world. The conservation world is highly politicized, and um, when it comes to actually getting involved in the politics of conservation, you don't seem to be afraid.
Michelle, I don't like confrontation. I try and avoid it if possible, and I find a good working relationship is obviously a lot more beneficial. But if I feel that someone needs to be called out on something, I'll do it. If no one else is going to step forward, yeah, and I think that someone is not doing their job or doing their job in an incorrect way and harming the marine environment, then I will certainly call them out on it. And I found myself on the other side of the table with the city of Cape Town in several instances. Um, and yeah, I'm pleased to say that from early days when it was very adversarial and I got threatened with lawsuits and lots of legal letters and whatnot. I now have a great working relationship with several people, and a lot of the stuff we do now is over a cup of coffee, which is a much nicer way to do it. So I try and avoid conflict, but if I need to, then that's the way we'll go.
That's very interesting. Let's just take, for example, the raw sewage outfall problem that you've been on to, I think, for about 5 years now.
Yeah.
Is it still an ongoing battle between you and the Cape Town city, or are you actually finding ways to talk to each other about it?
So I mean, we are in open dialogue. I've got a much better relationship now with a lot of the people involved. As I say, I've got a kind of relationship where I can pick up the phone and ask a question and get an answer, or go and have a cup of coffee with a relevant person in the relevant department and get some answers. And if I feel that nothing's happening, I'll certainly use my resources to try and make it happen. But originally, it was a huge problem. Look, nothing's really changed in terms of the outfalls themselves. Cape Town still pumps, 28 million odd liters of raw sewage a day into the ocean, and nothing's going to change. But in fact, all the waste that we as humans generate and put either down the drain or into the sewage, the stormwater system. So from when you wash out your bin, or you clean your paintbrush, or um, you know, use the toilet, or you take a shower, every single bit of waste that we produce either ends up in the stormwater or in the sewage system, and all of that goes into the river and then into the sea or straight into the sea. So everything we use goes into the sea.
But does one sensitize people about our oceans who are, for example, landlocked and in cities, and it's not something that's in their zone of consciousness?
Well, in fact, that applies to the bulk of our population. By
Yes.
far and away, the vast majority of our population is too poor and
Mm.
will never have the time, the money, the opportunity, or the inclination to go into the water. For most people, the vast bulk of our country, the ocean is seen as either a food source, a source of protein, or a dumping ground, a place to throw things. And that's all it is.
That's right. So, um, do you feel that you're actually making some sort of difference?
There are a couple of ways to get around this. I mean, the old fashioned way is to have aquaria or aquariums, and places like the Two Oceans Aquarium in Cape Town do amazing work at getting people who would never have the opportunity to see some of the creatures that live under the sea into close contact. Um, and I've done lots of work with them, uh, and in the past, bringing underprivileged kids from places like Okanyo Primary and Masipo Malele to the aquarium, where they get shown around and taught about the animals in their own language, and they do amazing work. And then obviously the other side of it is to do a virtual educational campaign where people learn through documentaries and pictures and stories and images. When it comes to
Mm.
conservation photography and getting action, there are two sides to the conservation coin. One is obviously showing people the negative side, the poaching, illegal fishing, the pollution, and then, but it has an opposite effect. If you show people too much negativity, they go, well, it's, problem's too big and it's not worth fixing, and so the other side of that conservation coin is to show people the beauty and showcase the abundance and what we still have left that's worthy of protection. And Cape Town, although we do a lot wrong in terms of polluting our oceans and uncontrolled poaching and fishing, and on the same time, we have unbelievable abundance in our seas still in certain sectors, and we have so much that's worthy of our protection. So it's not too late. It's very much the opposite. It's now is the right time to act to conserve what we have.
You are very active on social media. It's obvious that that's what you try to do on your social media platforms, is to show both sides of the story in terms of what's happening in conservation. But um, and you get a lot of praise for it. But on the other hand, with social media, you can receive a lot of punches. You can come in for quite a bruising from the public because you're accessible to all.
No, it's definitely a double-edged sword. Um, so on the first part is that I'm very, very careful about what I put onto social media. I stick to topics that I actually know something about. I don't venture into any fields that I personally don't have any expertise in. So I stick to marine conservation, the marine environment, um, and then I stay away from politics and religion and as much as I can, and try and stick to just the raw facts. And I research my posts very well before I post anything. And when I make a mistake, I don't take it down. I leave it up there and then update the post, because we're all human. We all make mistakes, and I'm as willing to learn as anybody else. And I've found it an amazing tool. I don't use social media for kind of selfies and personal glorification. I use it to further marine conservation and to showcase some of the stuff. And I've learned as much from people on social media as they learn from me, because very often you see something, you don't know what you're looking at, and you put it out there and someone will know, and you learn a hell of a lot. But as I say, you have to be super careful about what you say and what you post. And I do a huge amount of research and try and stick to the facts as much as possible, and generally then it's all right. Once or twice I've fallen foul of the public, and it's been a bit of a learning curve.
Mm. Exactly. And it can be quite a painful learning curve unless you've got a bit of a thick skin.
Oh, very much so.
There's a documentary out on Netflix that everybody's talking about.
Craig
Um,
Foster's my octopus teacher, I'm sure you. Yeah.
yes. And so one of the phrases that I sort of picked up from that, and I wanted to ask you about, was that they talked a lot about their best wildlife interactions, and that sometimes the best interactions are when the creatures or you're looking at actually approach you as opposed to you chasing them. I mean, what have been your best wildlife interactions?
So Craig Foster, who is the star of the show, other than the octopus in that, is a friend. I'm proud to call him a friend, and he's 100% correct. I have had thousands of interactions with marine wildlife over the 30 years I've been diving, and without a question of a doubt, the very best ones have always been when the animal has initiated the encounter. You can swim after a marine creature and try and force an interaction, but generally you just generate a flight response and the animal's stressed. But when the animal chooses to interact with you on its terms, you are definitely due for an absolute magical interaction, and nothing beats that. So, to answer your question, I've been very privileged to have many amazing interactions. But I remember one, for example, of having two humpback whales that circled me, pushed me, and played with me for an hour, and the water was 8 degrees off Hout Bay, and I was there under permit from the Department of Environmental Affairs filming humpbacks. And I got out of the water, and the one humpback actually lifted its head out of the water and pushed the boat until I got back in the water. And when I got back in the water, they carried on playing with me. And every time I got too cold and got out of the water rather, got into the boat, they would push the boat until I got back in, until I couldn't anymore. I mean, it was an amazing experience to just play with these animals. They are as curious about us as we are about them. And it was just an unbelievable. You can clearly see you're dealing with a sentient being. And I've got many stories like that, but always when the animal has started the encounter.
It must have been a very gentle interaction for you, because you could have so easily. They obviously sense your boundaries, what you can take for that interaction to occur.
Well, I mean, you're dealing with a 40-ton animal, and obviously, getting close to whales is a bad idea in
Yes.
most times because they are so big. But they are unbelievably aware of their bodies and where their tails and fins and pectoral fins are. They've got massive spatial awareness, and you obviously have to read the body language of the animal and stay within the boundaries that the animal sets. So very often a humpback will swing its 4 meter long pectoral fin towards you and just kind of keep you at that distance. If it can't touch you, then it's happy. And the animal, if you know how to read their body language, animals always set very clear boundaries, and as long as you stay within those boundaries, you can have an absolutely magical time. But if you ignore those boundaries, you can get yourself hurt.
Yeah. So when they bumped you, how were they doing it?
Well, the animal would come towards me head first and just gently push me back through the water, and
Really?
I'd obviously swim away. You don't want to be kind of stuck on the end of a whale, and you just carefully keep your distance. And obviously, I'm trying to film at the same time, so you don't you don't necessarily want to be being pushed around. But the animals are amazing. They have such a sense of awareness. They know exactly what they're doing, and they know what you're doing. As long it's a mutual respect thing. As long as you respect the animal, and the animal will generally respect you. It's a minute when you try and force something, get too close, try and force a shot, try and force an encounter, then that's when the problems
Mm.
start.
Lockdown. The lockdown period that you had to undergo. Um, and in one of your posts, you mentioned that you felt very disconnected from the ocean. And I was interested to know what you meant by that. Did you mean you missed the ocean, or
No, I meant during lockdown we weren't allowed to leave our houses. I couldn't even take a drive to go and see the ocean, let alone dive in it or fly over it. Or for the last 10 years, I've pretty much done once or twice weekly flights around the peninsula to check on what the animals are doing in the ocean, and have been diving a lot at the same period. So I'm intimately in touch with. I know when the first whales arrive off our coast. I know when the humpbacks are gathering in supergroups off Dustin Island. I know when the seals are pupping and molting. I know when the pulse of the ocean is something that I'm intimately connected with, and not being able to even see the ocean for a couple of months, it was horrible. I felt completely disconnected. Not a case of I miss it. It's a case of I don't know what's going on. I don't know if everything's happening as it should. I don't know if the poaching's continuing unchecked. I just felt completely disconnected.
I was trying to break down that passive passion. Do you feel anger when you see things happening that shouldn't happen, or what is fueling your passion?
Well, I don't really feel anger. I feel more disappointment. I thought we as a
Mm.
species in 2020 should know better than to do a lot of the things that we're doing. Um, and the fuel comes from the fact that I have had 30 years of unbelievable encounters and sights underwater and above the water. And you can't see the things I see and not want to do something to maintain a healthy ocean. I mean, I've had some unbelievable encounters and experiences, and it's just if you've seen the abundance that we have, you can't not want to protect it. It's not possible. So I feel almost duty bound. And the other thing is that, thanks to my vantage point of going underwater and above the water in the aircraft, I see things that most people will never get to see. And it means that I almost feel compelled to use my privileged position to make things happen in a way to protect the ocean. You can't have those experiences and then sit back and just allow things to go wrong.
To see Jean's wonderful images and stories, follow him on Facebook at Jean Tresfon Photography. A special thanks to Freesound. This podcast was brought to you by Digital Storyteller.